It's all fine. I'm just going to change the order of something. Authentication thing is a bit of a pain. Pardon? No, I think we just bring one.
Okay, we'll have just 1 more minute of talk, so start bringing your conversations to a conclusion, please. Just start with a little question for you before we get into the main questions. How long do you think that teacher had been teaching for? May I have a show of hands for people who thought that that teacher had been teaching for more than 15 years? Does anybody think that it was less than? Who's less? Okay. So who thinks it may have been less than 10 years? Anyone less than 5? Okay, so that teacher had been teaching for 2 years. It's interesting how context changes your perception when you add a little bit of context. She had one of the finest teachers in the world, actually, a lady called Elham Kazimir, who was working out of UW, and that school in particular was at the bottom of the school league tables 4 years prior to that, and by the time that video was filmed, they were at the top of the Seattle league tables. So it's an interesting space to be working in, and I think that when you start using video, it gives you a much greater insight into the little things in classrooms, and that's obviously what we'd like to talk to you about. How are you doing, Christoph?
Yeah, I think we're ready. So we're going to try and use the poll maybe to record what you thought about the task and what you thought about the language. I've not used this poll before, so we'll see if it works. If it doesn't, we'll just try and do normal questions and answers. Let's see. Ooh. Okay, so the first one that you can respond to, you should be able to respond to in the poll, is the nature of the task. So if you go back to your poll, you should be able to record what you felt the impact was of the task. Okay. In that case, if that's the first question you have in your poll, it would be interesting to know whether you've seen yourself teach. Yeah. In that case. Try now. Okay. Interesting. So this would indicate then, if I'm not mistaken, that a large proportion of you, 59% of you, have actually recorded yourself and seen your own practice, which is very impressive. Yeah, which is really impressive, because most audiences that I would engage with would probably see the reverse. So it would seem I'm among friends. Okay, well, the poll seems to be working, so... So the next question in the poll is likely to be, have you ever watched someone else teach using video? So it would... Oh. Okay. Thank you. No? Okay.
Okay, well, just with a show of hands then. Have you ever watched somebody else teach using video? Okay, I'm seeing that's... Apart from the video you just watched, you can't count that. Okay, well that's, again, probably more than we would normally expect. Oh. Oh well. Go on, let's get some quantitative data then. Go on, go for it.
My apologies, it's what happens when you use a third-party software. So, have you ever watched someone else teach? We should hopefully see the results here.
We can't see the question.
Okay, so yeah, incredibly high, yeah.
I think people are still counting that video.
Not counting the video you've just seen, of course.
Okay, so that's really interesting as well. So since it's not only geographically that there's more people in this audience who have had exposure to other teachers' practice through video, but also this is about the way that the world's changing as well. When we first started asking questions like this about 6 or 7 years ago, it was almost universal that people had not. So, we're now living in an entirely different digital connected world.
Okay, so finally, I think you should hopefully be able to respond to this question about the nature of the task. So perhaps in a short sentence, see if you can apply a response now. Interesting. So whilst these are coming up, I'm going to make a few comments, if I may. It's interesting that there are comments that relate to the discussion. Perhaps you can hear me better now. Particularly the fact that this seems to have ignited some discussion, enriches the discussion. Down here we have one comment which referred to the question as an open question. I guess my question back to you is whether it was really an open question. We often think about open questions as being these open-ended questions without a particular correct answer. But this was a mathematical problem. Does anyone have any thoughts about that? And obviously I can't use the poll for this, but if you were to raise your hand, what are your thoughts about the nature of the question the nature of the task? Why did it lead to a higher order thinking task? Why did it lead to a level of student thinking and an open and prolonged discussion?
Demand for reasoning. The demand for reasoning opened the discussion.
So the answer there was that there was a demand for reasoning from the outset, and that led to an open discussion. Does anyone else have any thoughts about that? Now, I don't know if you can get to those people there, Andy, in the... Yeah.
Well, first of all, I think that the exercise was presented as a riddle, and the teacher, in addition to demanding a reason, she gave the children an opportunity to discuss it in pairs and try to convince or explain to their partner the reason she demanded. And then she demanded to hear the explanations in front of all of her class. And in addition to this, she urged the kids to explain to one another why did they think as they thought.
Thank you. I'm also interested in the fact that I think I agree with you, absolutely, but my experience of maths as a pupil was quite different, and I think that I may have been quite fearful to be so open about my thinking, through fear of maybe being wrong. So what was it, I guess, that was allowing the children to take such risks? Perhaps someone else would like to respond to that.
Okay. Hello. Well, it was not an open question. It was as my colleague here said, it was a riddle, and it did encourage conversation. In a way, I'm not sure. You testify at yourself that you would be quite threatened to express your ideas in such a setting. I'm not a math person, but I also observed this conversation, and I asked myself, would I come out of this lesson of this class with a clear idea of the answer, of the mathematical concept? And I'm afraid that no. I'm afraid that in a way the conversation and the dialogue and the process, the activity became the center. And I'm afraid that it was on the account of the mathematical thinking. So my concern is that while having very much engaged students and very vivid conversation, I'm afraid that many of the students would come out from this discussion with not very clear concept of what was going on there.
Well, that's fascinating. Now, we obviously don't have the time to watch the extended clip and to arrive at any kind of concrete conclusions about whether it was a successful activity or not. So, again, when we use video, we have to be cautious about drawing any concrete conclusions, but I certainly get your point that there is a tension between the process and the value of the dialogue, and perhaps focusing on the result, the actual knowledge that's required the conceptual knowledge that's required. So I suppose that leads to a further question. You know, what is the purpose of this task? You know, what do we think the purpose of the task might be? Is it, do we think, to necessarily arrive at the correct answer? Or is it something else? What do people think?
I see it for not the second time, even more. The first thing that I would do in such a situation, I would calculate. And I think what the kids did, they didn't calculate. They were thinking mathematics. And for me, this is a miracle, because it's against what we were taught to do. We were taught to calculate, to do lower order mathematics at school. And this is what the last one, the Asian girl said. This is high thinking. She was amazing. She managed to explain me why is it right, false, or true. I couldn't now, at my age, give an answer like she gave, and she helped me to make mathematics philosophy much higher. So I think this is, and I contributed to the teacher, that she allowed a lot of time to think, to discuss, to celebrate philosophy.
Thank you. Yeah. I'm conscious of time. This was meant to be like an appetizer for the way in which we can engage meaningfully using video. There is one more question that I would just like to draw your attention to, which is the second one. So for this one, and obviously they are closely related, if you could just use maybe one word or phrase that you thought was interesting or unusual that perhaps the teacher used or maybe one of the pupils used, and the impact, we can then think about the impact that might have had on the nature of the discussion. So I don't know, I'm guessing that is now displaying on the poll for you. No, not yet? Okay, bear with me.
We'll just do this verbally if you want, Chris. How about, okay now?
Yes.
Good, go for it. Think. Ooh.
Yeah. So it's interesting. You can start to see that there are some themes developing in terms of those keywords and those phrases. We can see the word reason, defend, true, false, discuss, explain. These for me, these again, when I think about my own experience of a maths classroom, are quite unfamiliar words. These weren't words I was very used to hearing in a maths classroom. So now that you can see these words flashing up on the screen, perhaps we could have maybe one person's thoughts about that, about the impact that these words were having. Why did the teacher choose those words? They were carefully chosen. Why true and false and not right or wrong, correct, incorrect? Why defend? Why support? What do people think about that?
think one thing that we also discussed in the group that was very impressive was there was no judgment. And there was no, she didn't, at any point did you say, you're right, you're wrong, so, you know, that's a wrong answer, that's a right answer. She put, the emphasis was on discussing and thinking. And turning math into a discussion, like what Gil said, is innovative and it's really magical because in our mind, the way I was raised, math, you don't discuss math, you do math. And here, it turned into a discussion where every student felt that there was a place for what they thought and for their reasoning. No what?
The algorithm.
No algorithms. He's a math teacher, I don't know how to say those things. What he said. But I think that if they, at the end, these students at the end, in my perspective, will understand the math and they'll understand it better than I understand it because they understand how it relates to real world and to concrete examples, like how you know, Skittles and things that are very important in life.
Yes, Skittles are important. I certainly agree with that point.
The most important thing is the division of Skittles, the appropriate division of Skittles. Right? Just one thought. The longer version of this video is available, and we can make it available to you if that's something that would be of interest. What's really fascinating to me is towards the end. We don't usually do this and show some context outside the clip, but I think it's important. What happens is that eventually the class reasoning around the correct answer eventually convinces the learners who had the wrong interpretation. And there's actually a genuinely magical moment at the end where that child who you did see saying, I'm beginning to think,